Hello, Beehive Banter is back again after a week we actually had some respite from politics. And how bad are things when the highlight of the news cycle is discussing the rugby loss that went on for days. And at one point, the rugby union acting like the government, just not wanting to talk to the media who are apparently out for blood. Does it sound like politics? Anyway, we got over it. Or did we? It's just a game, Brent. It's not just a game. Anyway, local government is still grumpy about Three Waters. Why? Well, why is the government determined to carry on, Brent?
Well, the government's determined to carry on because it believes there's a big problem with the Three Waters infrastructure. And that, I don't think anyone disagrees with that. There is a problem with Three Waters infrastructure. This is our stormwater, our wastewater and our drinking water. A lot of the infrastructure is failing. And that's why we've got beaches in Auckland that people can't swim at because of sewage and other cities around the country. And all sorts of things in terms of stormwater too, because particularly with the flooding we're getting, often that is due to the fact either the stormwater system can't cope or it needs to be upgraded to deal with the fact that we are having more intensive floods. So there's a lot of issues. But I mean, what the councils object to is the control of that infrastructure has been taken off their hands and placed in the hands of these 4 new water services entities. Councils will retain shareholdings in those new entities, but they do lose that sort of direct control, and they argue that it's a breach of democracy because ratepayers and others won't have a direct say in the running of those organisations.
Well, there's also some of those councils that did have things under control, and now, of course, they've got to subsidise those that don't.
Well, there's those arguments. But some of the councils that say they've got things under control, when you look more closely, not necessarily under as much control as you might hope for. And there is an argument for cross-subsidisation. I know Auckland complains that it's going to be cross-subsidising the far north. But to be honest, when you think about the number of Aucklanders who go to the far north, for holidays, have holiday homes up there, is it going to be really cross-subsidisation? I'm not sure.
All right. Now, look, one group against Three Waters is the Taxpayers Union, who in fact were banned from the Local Government New Zealand conference on the future of local government last week, with their registration being revoked because of, and I'm quoting from one press release here, the Taxpayers Union has previously criticised LGNZ. The president of LGNZ said that they were not welcome because we don't like what you might say about the event.
Look, I
now,
think
what does that mean?
Well, yeah, I think when you give the Taxpayers Union some moral high ground, you've got problems. And really, I can't understand why they'd ban anyone from their conference. As you say, this is a conference of local government leaders, mayors and councillors, looking ahead actually to the local government elections later in this year when it's all about democracy, people's voices being heard, transparency and openness. And on that measure, they're actually closing off and transparency by cutting out one group because it's been critical of aspects of local government and, I should say, of local government New Zealand.
Are we at the point now where you can't have anything through fear that you might be criticised?
Well, look, it's just an example of an organisation and a group of people who are just too hypersensitive to criticism. They should just take it on the chin and actually respond. Put up their arguments, disagree with the Taxpayers Union and actually, bring them into the conference and tell them why they're wrong if they are wrong.
Yeah, not going to happen. For a moment there, I thought you were talking about the rugby union. Now listen, back to this thing. The PM spoke at it and said the government is listening. But if the government was listening, there'd be a change to Three Waters.
Well, there has been a change. There have been changes made, Grant. You might have missed them. But there have been changes made, but they haven't gone as far as some of the opponents would like. And they made changes to the way the water service entities were being set up to make it much clearer that the councils, they hold the shares. They're the owners of those water entities and the like. So changes have been made, but the councils that disagree with it want to retain control of the infrastructure. They want
What's
to keep
going to
on doing
happen?
it.
No, hang on. What's going to happen here if the net's getting? Because they've already said it's gone.
Well, they say they're going to scrap it. So, you're going to have a whole lot of work that will be undone. And then what happens after that, not sure. Because even those councils that oppose the Three Waters reform accept there needs to be reform. They accept that change needs to happen. They'll put up some of their own proposals, which are more around more voluntary sort of groupings of councils that might work together on infrastructure. So, there is an acceptance that there needs to be change. It's just a disagreement about how it should happen. But yeah, it could get very, very messy over the next few years. And in the meantime, perhaps no improvement actually being made to the pipes under the ground.
All right, and the Prime Minister also said a lot of things, including the scale of change is large and the pace is fast, but not insurmountable. The work will take time, she said, but not forever. It might just seem like forever, Brent.
Well, it might seem forever. I mean, the government keeps on running out the line. It's going to cost $185 or up to $185 billion over, I think, the next 30, 40 years.
Well, we know how they've been getting numbers right over the last so many years, don't we?
Well, I think I've seen different numbers, and some don't put it as high as that. But whatever, it is many, many billions of dollars that are required to both maintain but upgrade systems. And I think the Treasury paper that MBR got hold of this week talking about that in terms of actually the credit ratings for these new water entities, and talking about how they'd be regulated to ensure that they get the best possible credit rating. But it too points out that the regulation needs to ensure that they can borrow quite a lot of money, because they're going to have to spend a lot to upgrade the infrastructure, not just to deal with what we've got at the moment, but as the Treasury points out, with the continuing impact of climate change, things are going to get worse, particularly when it comes to stormwater.
Right, I want to talk about something cheaper now. A simple, cheap mask. Free for most of us. Last week, the Junior Parliament came into town and ended up with the obligatory group photo with, yes, the PM. Gasp, horror, no mask. Now, we heard it all. She should be setting an example. Bad look through to, it's a photo, get over it. And it was only briefly taken off. We all do it. Now, where are you on this, Brent?
Look, the previous week, the government put out an announcement around new measures to cope with this surge in COVID cases. We've got a second wave of Omicron with this new subvariant. It's happening around the world. The clear message the government gave was mask wearing is essential. And essentially, they didn't mandate it, but they basically say you should wear a mask in any indoor setting other than your home. Now,
unless you mandate it, people ain't going to do it.
The Prime Minister's in an indoor setting with a large number of people. And yes, granted, it might have been they took the mask off for a few moments, but that photograph sits there of the Prime Minister surrounded by many, many people in an indoor setting without a mask on. At a time,
I reckon they were holding their breath.
Yeah, at a time the government is trying to get people to wear masks. And here in Auckland, where I've been for the last couple of weeks, Grant, you go around a lot of shopping centres and in shops, a lot of people not wearing masks. And
do you walk out?
I do, out of those that are, where there's really bad use of masks. Yes, I do.
Good. Well, good on you. At least you're putting your money where your mouth is. All right, now the Nats say personal responsibility. Now, look, I wear mine all the time, except on planes, though, when I get the cheese, and it's not in plastic, it's in the air. They hand it to you, and I munch on it while people sitting next to me munch on their cheese, but they wouldn't do that if they had COVID, would they, Brent? See how easy it is?
Well,
our rules are flaky at best.
Look. There are always going to be inconsistencies. Look, the only thing about not being inconsistent is if we just shut down completely and stayed home and went into lockdown, or if we said don't worry about any precautions. But there will always be inconsistencies in these sorts of rules when you're trying to allow life to carry on pretty much as normal, so businesses can continue operating, but at the same time offer as much protection as you possibly can. So, that's the argument. You wear a mask into an indoor setting, but when you sit down to eat, you take it off to eat. And people say, well, that's a bit odd. But at least you're offering a level of protection that you otherwise wouldn't have.
There's no difference from taking a mask off on a plane to eat a bit of cheese than there is to take a mask off for a photo.
Well, yep, but Grant, with all due respect, you're not Prime Minister of New Zealand. You're not in a leadership role. You haven't been saying these things. I don't have high expectations of you. Sorry about that.
Now, look, one person that actually backed the PM was Nicola Willis. Yep. Now, I want to talk about Nicola Willis. I thought she had a very good week last week. Well-spoken, got a point across, wasn't fazed by questions or journalists, looked and sounded like she knew her stuff, knew the figures, very confident, very competent, do you think?
So this is largely after the announcement of the 7.3% annual inflation rate, so going up, the highest rate in about, 32 years. Look, I think she is quite competent and confident, but actually at the moment for an opposition finance spokesperson, it's a pretty easy gig. You've got inflation running out of control.
Oh, come on.
No, you've got inflation running out of control and you can give the government a whack. No, what I'm saying is...
She is sounding more confident in terms of the spokesperson on finance than any other national spokesperson on that for years.
Oh, I thought Simon Bridges in the brief period he was there was so good. No, look, I agree with you, but all I'm saying is the pressure will come on Nicola Willis next year in the lead up to the election when National is going to have to roll out some figures, out some sort of real proposals about what they'll do and put some figures on them. And remember, in 2020, the botch up over its sort of alternative budget got the numbers wrong. So she'll be really working hard, I would think, to ensure that next year, when they put out whatever alternative budget they do, the numbers do add up, because you can certainly imagine that the Finance Minister, Grant Robertson, is going to be looking at those numbers as they did in 2020 and will try and pick holes in them. So she'll face more scrutiny and more pressure.
Is she suffering the same scrutiny that Luxon is, briefly?
No, because... no one faces the same pressure as the opposition leader.
All right, moving on. Coming up,
but she
resuming.
might get close next year.
Okay, fair enough. Now, coming up, Parliament resuming after a quiet 3 weeks, although not for everyone. Get ready for a feisty first week, Brent. Lots of fodder, as you said, for the opposition. Where do you see them attacking the government?
Oh, well, obviously they'll continue on the cost of living with inflation at 7.3%. Crime is going to come up again. We had the government during that break announce some measures to deal with gang crime, but then, we've got the figures coming out that the National Party spokesperson, Justice spokesperson Paul Goldsmith used last week about ram rates up 500% for the first 6 months of this year compared to the same period in 2018. So there'll be a lot of discussion around that. I think what there won't be a lot of talk about will be COVID. With case numbers up, death rates up, I think the only people perhaps who might raise concerns about that will be the Green Party and Te Pāti Māori. But neither Labour, National or ACT really seem to want to talk a lot about that, because all three parties seem very much committed to letting life carry on as usual.
Yeah, well, of course, you mentioned Paul Goldsmith there. He was the one that had that, that budget hole, wasn't it? Really? Right, that's Beehive Banter for another week. Another week of trying to survive the best we can. Try not to be sick again. Try to just keep going. I reckon try and find one funny thing each day. Brent, you're my funny thing.
Yeah, and I'm looking at my funny thing.
Excellent. Stay safe. See you in a week.